we use to do a lot of the functions that we wouldn't have been able to do if we'd have just stuck with doing it in circuitry. It runs at 48 kilohertz, which is real close to the 50 kilohertz that the older Goldmasters run at, but we made it a little bit different so that the two wouldn't crosstalk. In designing this new Goldmaster, we had two very important criteria. It had to operate at temperature extremes because gold prospecting is done in desert heat, and it's done in the tundra of Alaska and just about everything in between. And in order to do that, there's a thermistor in the machine, and the computer reads the voltage on that thermistor and uses that to temperature compensate the rest of the machine so that it's stable with temperature. The other criterion we had is that it had to operate nicely in the meanest dirt that's out there, and so we did some tricks in the analog circuitry and in the software in order to make it operate nicely and really have mineralization that'll give other machines fits. The ground balance system is entirely in software. It's all in the computer. It's not done by analog components. It tracks very fast. It's able to recognize the difference between ground and objects like hot rocks or pieces of metal. And it's very reluctant to track into things it shouldn't track. It tries to track the matrix. It was important in this thing that it tracked quickly and also to track dead on or just slightly positive. Almost everyone who's tested it has said that it tracks just about as well as you could do manually or better. In this new design, the controls are not part of the analog circuitry. The microprocessor that's in there, it looks at those controls and then uses the information from the controls to operate the software. And because of that, sometimes the way the controls feel will be a little bit different than what you're used to in prior metal detectors. Since this machine uses a microprocessor, it's got a lot of information in there that can be analyzed to determine the type of ground, the amount of mineral in the ground, the probability of a target being a certain type. And so we decided to put that information on the display and make it available to the user. The machine takes the signals that come from the search coil, and those signals go into the analog front end of the metal detector, which that amplifies those signals, and then they go into an analog to digital converter. It's a high-performance unit that's never been used in a metal detector before, and then that data goes to the microprocessor, and the microprocessor then crunches the numbers and analyzes that data. Once the computer has analyzed this data, then it transmits the data over a 5-wire link up to the pod where the LCD display is, and it puts the information on that display. And some of the information that's on that display is of a type that users have never had access to before. It hasn't been on any other metal detector.
Now let's get back to Jimmy and hear what he has to say as he goes a little further into the controls of the Goldmaster.
The heart of the GMT is in its ground balancing system. It's something I've been waiting for a long time. The controls on the ground balance toggle have only two positions. One, fast auto track, and the other manual. Now, in order to use the detector, you only have to push the toggle forward and let the detector do the work for you. Fast auto track is measuring the ground as the coil is passing over the ground. It is measuring the amount of mineralization and adjusting the balancing of that mineralization so that you can see through the ground and see the targets in the ground. That elimination of mineralization is what ground balancing is, and the GMT does it automatically. The other position is manual. There are some people who still don't believe in automatic transmissions, and they don't believe in automatic anything, and they want to manually ground balance. We've allowed that to happen here. Don't have to use it if you don't want to. You can just leave the toggle in track, push it down to manual, and now it's up to you. You can balance the ground with the plus and minus touch pads. Now the plus and minus touch pads up here are the same ones and the same type of thing that we had on the Goldmaster 4. When you balance the detector, by pumping the loop up and down in the manual position, the pressing the plus touch pad will eliminate negative mineralizations. Pressing the minus eliminate positive ground. So in pushing them alternatively, they will adjust the ground so that the sound is consistent. That amounts to manual ground balancing. It's something we'll go into in detail later. But the ability is there to do it if you want to do it. When you are in the fast tracking position, the number in the upper left-hand corner, which measures the type of ground that you're in, adjusts to that type of ground. It defaults at 77, which is where ferrite is balanced out at, and will go up or down accordingly. If the ground is more positive, it'll go lower. The ground is more negative, it'll go higher, from 0 to 99. That's a reference number that you may not ever even want to use, but if your buddy says, where are you balanced at, and you look down and your ground says 77, he says, mine's 54, I'm a lot hotter ground over here. You know, this is red dirt, maybe we find some gold. This is just a piece of information you can use or not use, but it's there. It changes all the time while you're tracking. If you were in the manual position, however, it stays where you set it. It starts at 77, and then you make the plus and minus corrections, and if it ends up at 65, it's going to stay at 65 unless you change the plus or minus touchpad. So basically, that's manual, and this is automatic. Most of it's going to use automatic. The diehards out there are going to use the manual, but we want to please everybody with this detector, so that's why we have it on there. There's another number up on the upper right-hand corner, 0 to 99, which is registering the amount of magnetic mineralization. We're going to get into how, after all, this is something we've never had before. The amount of mineralization, not to be confused with the kind of mineralization. And we have labeled this follow black sand, because in essence that number is going to increase as you get higher and higher concentrations of mineralization, which is where the gold will be. Usually around dry washes, for dry washers to use, it'll be around creek beds where black sand is concentrated. By pumping the loop up and down and following along, you can watch that number grow and know where to set up your dry washer. Now, this is so new that we haven't really had a chance to explore it. Someone out there is going to find lots of tricky things to do with following the black sand. We're waiting for those answers, but it's there. The microprocessor collected that information in our tracking process and stored it, and it's displaying it now as a number. We never knew that number before. This microprocessor is a magnificent brain that records everything that's happening under that coil. You can use it or not use it to your best advantage, but it's there. This grab button is something that is totally unique, and, well, I call it whizzy. It is as whizzy as it gets. The grab button is not essential. Again, none of these are essential. You can just go along one track, but the grab button is working to instantly, and I mean instantly, change the position of the ground balance. In other words, it will correct the detector to that piece of ground that the detector last saw. Now, if you think for a moment, that is sitting next to this manual. It works on manual, it works on tracking. When the detector is tracking, and you can see the numbers change, it is measuring the ground. It's changing where the ground balance is, but it's storing that in memory. And when you press grab, that position of where the last piece of ground you saw is in memory. It is doing it all the time. So our ground balance system is doing it all the time. Grab recalls it. Now, let me give an example. Say we were using the detector in manual. You've adjusted plus and minus. You are balanced to that piece of ground, only that piece of ground. As you're moving around, your detector is going into ground that is not balanced. And you'll notice differences in sounds. You're not really tracking, so you're staying in one kind of ground. And if the ground changes a lot, you may decide I want to re-ground balance, as we do now with all detectors, all manually operated detectors. If you manually ground balance, you've got to go back with plus and minus. You don't have to. You can take grab. All you have to do is, your detector was over here, you balanced over there. All you do is press grab. You don't even have to have the loop near the ground. You press grab. It instantaneously goes back to the ground that you just saw. And the number here possibly will change depending on how severe the change is in the ground. So this is an instantaneous ground balance. If I wanted to use it in tracking, you might be hunting along and come across a large target, a large hot rock. and you aren't laboring over it, but you hear this boing sound that we hear on negative hot rocks, you immediately